Thank you, Bruce. So, as we says, our first panel, heading towards Industry 4.0, and the moderator is Tom Simmons. You look on the screen. He is the Vice President of Majestic Realty. So, please get a big applause.
Well, good morning, and thank you for the introduction. Welcome, everybody, to the USMCA Automotive Industry Summit panel, heading towards Industry 4.0. My name is Tom Simmons. I'm a development partner with Majestic Realty Co. and excited today to have three great speakers for this panel on Industry 4.0. I'd like to start and welcome first would be Mo Abuali, who is the managing partner of IoTco. Mo, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Tom, good morning. Glad to be here. Thanks.
Excited to have you here and look forward to your input. Also here today, we have Eric Palencia. Eric is the CEO of Integra Automation. Eric, good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Look forward to your insights today as well. Lastly, we also have Matt Kelly. Matt is the CTO of IPC. Sorry for all the acronyms, but Matt, we're very excited to have you here as well.
Thanks as well. Appreciate it.
So the format today is going to be a question and answer session where our three distinguished experts are going to weigh in on some of the exciting trends of Industry 4.0 and what that's going to mean for the automotive industry and how its impacts on USMCA and cross-border trade. I will be presenting questions specifically to each of our panelists, but then we'll also have the opportunity for the other two panelists to weigh in with some of their insights and responses on these individual topics. You'll also note that there is a QR code that is up. Please feel free to use that with your smartphones, and you can submit individual questions that might arise during this presentation format of approximately 60 minutes, which will give the audience, both those in person and digitally, virtually, the chance to chime in, ask individual questions either of the panelists or of the individual topics that might be of your interest or things that you'd like to hear more about and understand further on this rather interesting topic that I think most will get quite a bit out of. So what we'd like to do now is to go through a series of questions. I'm going to start, Mo, with you, and then we'll go after Mo will be Eric and then Matt, and then we'll actually have one more round thereafter during this format where each of the panelists will have a specific question. But please, gentlemen, at the end of the individual responses, if there are specifics you would like to add or provide more color to these topics, I would encourage you to weigh in after the initial responses. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay, terrific. So Mo, as I mentioned, I'd like to start with you. First question is, it isn't always clear for leaders which Industry 4.0 innovation initiatives to adopt. What is your advice in finding the right Industry 4.0 technology? And then a follow-on to that is, when should you start implementing an Industry 4.0 initiative?
That's a great opening question, Tom. And if we look at the history of Industry 4.0 or the fourth industrial revolution, it's all about digitization. It's all about moving from a manually oriented or reactive type of environment to a more connected, real-time, proactive way of doing business and doing manufacturing. And therefore, the answer to your question is it really boils down to an assessment of where the manufacturer is in their journey, okay? There is a maturity level, call it digital maturity or call it Industry 4.0 maturity. And it's very important to assess where you are in your journey. How connected are you? Are you using Industry 4.0 tools on the factory floor? Do you have real-time KPIs like OEE, overall equipment effectiveness? Have you started to implement artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on? So that maturity curve takes the manufacturer from an Industry 3.0 setting where things are done manually to an Industry 4.0 settings where things are connected, things are becoming visible, things are becoming adaptive and predictive and even prescriptive. So that's, I think, a key advice. You have to understand where you are in your journey, and based on the Industry 4.0 maturity level, you have to decide on the right tools to implement in a phased approach to make that journey happen, and always keeping a business case in mind. Why am I doing this? Start with the why. Are you improving uptime? Are you reducing scrap? And how does that impact the P&L of the business at the end of the day? And then a short answer to your second point, when should you start? Now. Please start now. It's becoming extremely a competitive market. And even if you think your Industry 4.0 maturity level is low, there are tools where you can start, you can digitize, you can train the workforce, and you can start taking the journey towards digital transformation.
So your thought is that adaptation is a yesterday necessity as opposed to a forward-looking type of concept, and something you would recommend 100%. Needs to be a point of focus for the automotive industry. Regardless of size, large or small, you have to remain competitive, and Industry 4.0 and digitization is now. It is not the future, it is now. We like to say, think big. What's the vision? What's the why? Start small, pilot, build the business case, and then scale fast, but also fail fast, but act now. You have to act now. Great advice. Eric or Matt, where would you like to weigh in with any thoughts on that?
I completely agree with Mo that regarding the time to implement, and the time is today. You just need to have clear what the purpose of such implementation is. But every company, no matter the size, has the possibility to start right now.
Matt, any comments you'd like to share as far as coming from your role as the chief technologist at IPC? Where does your company put its focus on this type of implementation?
I think the one key point to add, and again, I agree with both Mo and Eric on the points they made, but the one thing that we see is to really focus on the business challenge. There's so many technologies that are out there, and people get confused, as well as not really focusing on return on investment for what they're actually trying to do. So my addition to this would just be to make sure that you're focusing on solving the real business problem that you're after. I know that seems generic, but it seems that a lot of messaging has been backwards. You need certain technologies and you will be better. But what we hear from our membership, as well as across the industry, is that it's like it's always been. You have to start with the business need first, then apply the tools and technologies to solve the problem.
Yeah, profitability always being key, right? I mean, that's important, not to just implement for the sake of implementation, but implementing to make sure that it actually affects the bottom line of the company.
Agreed.
Yeah, that's well said. If possible, I'd like to, Eric, move this next question over to you to start, and if you'd be able to weigh in here. So are Industry 4.0 solutions focused only on large companies and corporations, or is there also the possibility of implementing them in more small and medium-sized companies? And then I have a couple of follow-on questions, but I'd like to start with that.
Yes, historically, the implementation of cutting-edge technology solutions has been led by large international companies. However, today, it's possible for single companies or single-person companies, maybe, or medium or small companies, to have access to innovative technologies, just like the large ones. In such way, all kind of companies have the possibility to access to these new technologies and solutions, because now they can implement these solutions at a very low prices, so they don't have to have the big money to implement such solutions. In the other hand, the big diversity of the and stages of digitization of the different companies, it makes almost impossible to have a receipt for everybody or every company. So fortunately today we have alternatives for the different kind of companies, the different stages of maturity, as Mo said, because now there are ready to go and packaged solutions that could be implemented at the cloud with a very low price of entry. And these kind of solutions are scalable. They can be implemented in just one part of the company, and you can go further with other areas of the same company. And you have the possibility to interconnect different kind of systems, from sensors to PLCs, to man-machine interfaces, or other systems inside the company, like ERP systems or other legacy solutions. It's important to have in mind that the solution just need to be open to interconnect to other kind of systems to different mechanisms of communications.
So you're saying that these solutions don't need to be developed from scratch, and there are some that already are packaged and ready to go. Maybe you can comment a little bit further on that.
Yeah, it's possible for some companies also to develop from zero a solution. I think it depends on the maturity level they have in this situation. For example, here in Mexico, we have found companies that even they are big companies in terms of controls or instrumentation are very old. So even if they wanted to implement a great solution, they need to start from the instrumentation of the PLC. So some of machines right now in these big companies are already analog or with analog systems. So they need to start from that.
Yeah, knowing that we have thousands of panelists, both between in-person or participants rather, both in person and online here, at this forum, looking at the opportunity and understanding that some of these will be from the largest OEMs down to some that are literally startups. So your advice is there are places to go. There are opportunities where you don't need to go from an analog to digital conversion. You can go and kind of piggyback on some of the work that has been done by others and make this adaptation a quicker and more efficient process then.
Yes, I think the great thing is that right now or today, all these kind of solutions have been democratized, and everybody can use it at their own rhythm, at their own pace. So this is the great thing today.
Very helpful. Very helpful. Matt, anything that you'd like to weigh in on this ability for the small versus the large and this implementation that can kind of go across the spectrum of various sizes of companies?
Yeah, and it ties into our last discussion somewhat because, what we hear from, we deal with big and large companies across the world. And I think the biggest challenge that we hear about is CapEx and upfront investment. And so automatically everybody gets very nervous and scared that they need to have this, multi-million-dollar deployment with, lots of different complications, and it all has to work perfectly. And it just, to anybody trying to roll out a solution like that, it's daunting, for anybody. And so one of the things that we try to talk about, especially to the small to medium enterprise companies, is again, start small. We use that Lego block type of building approach where you don't need to boil the ocean and solve everything at once. Zero in on your key KPIs Mo was talking about earlier, on what you want and need to solve, and then understand what new ways of working there are available to you. Industry 4.0 to us and to our clients that and members that we work with, it's really just about new ways of working. And so, analyze that and then go forward with those things that make sense.
Mo, knowing that IoTco is very much a forefront in this development and this implementation, what would be your take on that from the spectrum of various different sizes of companies and who can implement and how?
Survey says 80-20 rule applies here. 80% plus of manufacturers, I think, in North America are actually classified as small-sized companies, less than 500 employees. Just imagine, over 80%. And therefore, you have the OEMs and then you have the tier suppliers. They are mostly tier 2s and tier 3s. But the supply chain is getting very, very aggressive. The supply chain, the OEMs are becoming extremely demanding. It's a very conservative, low margin business, especially in the automotive world. And just imagine how the OEMs are crunching the tier 1s. The tier 1s are crunching the tier 2s, crunching the tier 3s. So what does this mean? This means I need to do better scheduling. I need to do better costing. I need to do better visibility on my shop floor. And if I'm not able to do this, and if I continue to use paper, and if I continue to be reactive, I'm not going to be able to hit the margins, and therefore I'm not going to be able to be profitable. So the world around us is already really pushing that 80% plus small manufacturers to become conscious about moving from industry 3.0 to industry 4.0, okay? And then the other points mentioned by the gentleman, Matt and Eric, computer hardware is getting cheaper, cloud is getting cheaper, sensors are getting cheaper, data acquisition is getting cheaper. Back in the day, a vibration sensor used to be $1,000. Now it's $100 or $150. Just imagine the factor, you know? So crunch from the top, but low cost of entry. So it just becomes a no-brainer for SMBs to enter the technology world and to start becoming competitive in an ever increasing competitive global market space.
You know, great segue with Mo's remarks there, Matt, that I'd like to see if I could bring to you this next topic, because I think it's a nice, appropriate transition based upon the comments here from the three of you. You know, Matt, what do you see are the immediate hurdles, and what would you say are the key focus areas, near term for Industry 4.0 adoption for the automotive electronics industry?
Well, who would have thought we would have been having this call virtually as opposed to face to face? It's a really nice example of some of the big macro things that are going on right now. I mean, COVID, of course, the continuing tariff and trade wars that happened, and now we have a global supply chain and part shortage. Those are three major factors. So, if we can move those aside, if that's possible for a moment, one of the things that we definitely see when we talk about Industry 4.0 is this notion of something out in the future, something that is coming, something we need to do. And one important messaging that we want to pass along is you can equate this to like the Tour de France with the peloton and the leader out in front. A lot of times these discussions and these concepts get too far out in front, and they don't actually relate to the business problem on somebody's desk today. And so I think there needs to be more focus put on looking towards those things that are big and grand and can really improve your bottom line. But at the same time, they really need to be practical and help with, this quarter, next quarter, next year's type of scenario. So my message, first of all, is to not get too far out in front, because otherwise it just becomes hand waving and, kind of wishing of things that we could do versus what you can really do practically. The other point that I would make is rate and pace. The rate and pace of technology within the automotive sector especially is incredible. You sit in a car today versus even 5, 6, 7 years ago. The cockpits are completely different, completely digital. We're talking about, obviously, electric vehicle drivetrains. You think about the amount of electrification and electronics being put in the automobile. I do not need to say to this audience the rate and pace of which that is happening. Unfortunately, the rate and pace on the technology side for Industry 4.0 adoption is not keeping pace. These things are much slower. Again, CapEx we talked about. And so if we try to solve these Industry 4.0 problems, we're going to be too late for what we really need to deliver out the door from a product development standpoint. My third point is around differentiation and secrecy. Rightfully so, when you spend that kind of money and you have all of these great strategic ideas, this becomes competitive advantage, or so it's thought to be competitive advantage inside of companies. And of course, that's very, very true. The world has operated like this, since the beginning of business. However, one of the things that we do see as an impediment, and this is the biggest hurdle, is the need to obviously protect. I'll use Mo, you use that 80-20 rule. I'll use it here again. Hopefully not too far off, but 20% of what companies are doing is absolutely secret. It is competitive. It is what makes that company compete in the marketplace. But when you look at a supply chain and how you want it to run, somewhere around maybe 70 or 80% of it, you want it to run with good communication. You want it to be efficient. You want it to be low touch. All of these things. And so to do that, we need, I think, as I said, the biggest hurdle is more collaboration and more standardization of a variety of different elements, whether that's data exchange or whether that's how equipment can operate and kind of plug and play and talk to each other, or it can be network systems as well. So I think those are the three comments that I would make in terms of today's hurdles. And I think we'll get into it in another question here. But I think the bottom line is really about digitization. If we as an industry can work together to digitize a whole slew of things, then we will actually have a chance at this grand, Industry 4.0 vision that we all have. If we cannot come together to some relatively agreed upon data flow and digitization method, then unfortunately, I think we may still be talking in 10 years now about siloed approaches.
Mo, I see you nodding your head and agreement with this. When I look at this, there is the rapid acceleration that's coming from the technology standpoint, but there's also the very real need for CapEx that is involved to physically place those resources of a company into adopting these types of digitization trends. How do you see this from the near-term focus of the adoption to the concern of having to place that money today into this technology, which are real dollars that don't materialize right away?
The business case is crucial, and I really appreciate what Matt said. We have actually a nice graphic that says technology adoption is increasing exponentially, but the people and process is logarithmically, looks like this. So having them converge is very difficult, actually. And with Industry 4.0, everybody always talks about technology. Let's talk about AI, let's talk about ML, let's talk about augmented reality, fun stuff, if you figure out the abbreviations, there's so many abbreviations.
Right.
But actually, Industry 4.0, there was a study that said almost 80% are doomed to get stuck in pilot purgatory. You're stuck. So you've got a nice pilot running of some fancy technology, but it is not scaling. And usually the issue is not technology, it's people and process. So it's in that sequence, people, process, technology. So having that magic recipe of people, process, technology, when you're creating your business case, back to your question, is very important. And it's important to assess and prioritize where should you start, right? Think big, start small. Let's say I have 20 plants, right? Each plant has a different level of maturity. Each plant has different revenue structures. So it's important to have a prioritization scheme so you can start at the right place. And then even inside that factory, your stamping department might have a different ROI and maturity than your paint department, than your CNC machining department. So build a business case around the prioritized right place in your business to start. There are ways to do that. And find that people, process, technology recipe that makes sense. And then think about a KPI to measure success, realistic KPI. Is it improving overall equipment effectiveness? Is it improving uptime, improving scrap? Is it improving spare parts? Is it improving labor productivity? And set realistic targets. And if you do it right, you should hit that target usually within about 90 days, within 3 months of implementing an Industry 4.0 pilot. But don't make the mistakes of continuing trying to push it out, hoping that things are going to change. They're not going to change. you have to pivot, you have to reassess, and you have to keep running that cycle. So long-winded answer to your question, but really we have to think about an assessment, the recipe, and then the business case and the success factors that make sense.
No, it absolutely does. Absolutely does. Before we move on to the next topic, Eric, it's obviously it's in the name of the company, Integra Automation. Where are you, working as far as trying to tackle this concept of the exponential increase in technology in the short term, and then understanding the relative constraints we have of the human capital situation?
We are living a very great time and very complicated. Right now, we have a lot of different technologies that we could use to implement our solutions. However, all the things that have come along with this COVID era have added different kind of difficulties for the implementation. So right now we have not just some problems to solve inside the company, inside the communication of the people of the different areas, but at the same time we need to find a way how to put everything together. Technology people, we are missing a lot of skilled people, not just to define the right solution or to make the business case, that sometimes is the most difficult thing, because the people inside the companies know the numbers, but they not always share that numbers with the consultants of the companies like Integra Automation. So sometimes it's difficult to help them to identify or to make a very solid business case, because such information sometimes is behind different departments, and sometimes there are some confrontation inside the different people of the companies. So as Mo said, we need a lot of communication, not just with the partners or the solution providers, but inside of the companies. So we need to have very close communication among different stakeholders in order to have a very success implementation. Other way, as it happened in the early 90s with the ERP systems implementation, the information gave power to the people that own the information. Now you need to multiply that for the different locations, different technologies, and different solutions that can be implemented. So we need a lot of communication with people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say just, in these first several topics, as the dumb industrial developer who's providing floor space for a lot of the folks who are, listening to this presentation, we clearly got the right people on this panel. So I really like the way this is starting. I think this is very informative for everyone here. Mo, I'd like to shift this next topic back over to you if I could. Once the challenge of identifying and prioritizing, the most compelling possibilities of Industry 4.0 program has been addressed, the next step, I believe, is justifying the economic business case as we've been discussing. How are you calculating the business case in your business?
So I'll give maybe an example. We've worked with a client that's doing casting, high pressure casting. It's a large automotive, actually a mid-size automotive supplier, tier supplier. And they had an issue. The issue was the quality rates, the scrap rates on their casting machines were higher than standard. And the OEMs were putting pressure, recalls, not recalls, not that bad, but customer concerns and complaints and things of that sort. So they were looking for innovative ways to reduce scrap on the cells. So they actually did an assessment of their key casting operations. And if you're familiar with the casting industry, just imagine the industry standard of scrap in a casting plant is about 9%. Imagine that. I can withstand 9% scrap and I'm still, to par with my competition. So by implementing, techniques to collect process parameters from the machine and then to correlate the process parameters to scrap on the cell, they were able to actually create a project, and they used some advanced analytics, artificial intelligence, things of that sort. So higher maturity Industry 4.0 tools. And they were able to reduce scrap by multiple scrap points, and 1% scrap reduction in a mid-sized casting operation is almost $250,000 per year in savings.
Wow.
They actually called the project the power of 1%. They didn't over-exaggerate and say, I want to reduce 9-10% scrap. They actually want to reduce 1 scrap point per year, and that was over 100% ROI for the software they needed, the hardware they needed, the services it took to implement. So ROI less than 12 months in a mid-size automotive operation by focusing on critical assets, by implementing Industry 4.0, and by implementing the power of 1%. But again, it doesn't mean you have to do that. You can reduce other metrics, uptime, spare part, and so on. But usually reducing quality and scrap issues is one of the most tangible applications that can hit the P&L directly for the business.
So, as we were saying in the previous topics was, from implementation is the idea, start small, think big. But even with the application, something as small as 1% can make that meaningful of an impact to the bottom line. And so, Eric, I would like to, to pivot this over to you if you have brief comments in this regard as to what other of these business cases for the smaller of things where people don't need to think so incredibly grandiose as to be intimidated by Industry 4.0. What other small aspects have you seen that you could share that would be meaningful opportunities for people to consider?
For example, in the plastic industry, for the plastic bottles for water, for example, they used to have big or strong walls in the complete bottle, yeah? But once they wanted to reduce very little the thickness of the bottle, that because they produce millions and millions of bottles each day, just reducing a small amount of plastic, they could save a lot of money this year. So, but they need to have some solutions that could let them to measure the thickness of the wall, but not just to measure, but to control, to reduce the thickness without affecting the performance of the board. So there are for one model could be almost negligible amount of savings, but when you see the complete picture, companies could save a lot of money just for this little saving.
Yeah, and all those little bits of savings continue to go on to the profit and loss statement and just gives more opportunities for these companies to continue to succeed in the sector. So definitely important. Matt, before we wrap up this topic, I know from your perspective of really focusing on the technology, what types of modern applications are you seeing and are you advising that can help to enhance a business case for the adoption of 4.0 and the application of Industry 4.0?
Yeah, well, I think these are some great examples from both Mo and Eric. And, at IPC, we represent the electronics portion of the industry. So I'll kind of answer you in that light. Again, it's just in line with the start small, think big that we've been talking about already. But if we really had to boil this down, it really has to do with digitization of your operations. And that really helps with just literally every single thing that you're doing. It's in some cases, it's not as hard as it may seem. And the other observation that I would share is that now just this already dates back to 2019, 2020 before the pandemic hit. But lucky enough to travel the world and kind of see where everybody's at with this. And the other observation I would make is that, believe it or not, the adoption rate of some of the most simple things is still not occurring. And so it doesn't have to be the world's most advanced AI or machine learning algorithms or, converting into blockchain technologies. It can be as simple, especially if we're talking about small to medium-sized enterprises, to take those steps and understand what you can digitize. It helps you not just within your own factory, but it also helps you across the supply chain.
You guys are making my job far too easy with the way your responses are coming in, because this next question, Eric, I'd like you to take the first cut at. It's a broad topic, so bear with me here as I try to set the stage for where I think this can lead. So any technology deployment will inevitably encounter barriers to implementation, right? We've got skepticism, we've got fear of being unable to adapt, and those things cannot be ignored. But Industry 4.0 entails other dimensions of implementation and those challenges. So the question with that background is, what challenges are companies and different stakeholders throughout the supply chain facing during this Industry 4.0 planning, design, implementation, and operation? That's a mouthful, so break it apart as you see fit.
We have been talking a lot of technology, but technology doesn't exist without people. So right now, the first step is that somebody with the right skills, like a person or like a team, need to identify the business case, the right business case, in order to design or implement a solution. Here in Mexico, for example, there are a lot of engineers, a lot of professionals, but not all of them have the necessary skills to address this kind of specifications, these kinds of business cases. So from the company point of view, they require more qualified personnel in order to lead these initiatives inside the company. On the other hand, the universities are not going at the pace or at the velocity the companies are requiring the skilled professionals on the different areas, because now there are a mix of universities offering titles like mechatronic, that is a mix between mechanical, electrical, and software. But at the end, when you are implementing a solution, you need to be specific, but at the same time, you need to know about other kind of systems in order to define the right system, because it doesn't exist alone. It requires to be implemented a lot of different other systems, or even interacting with in a manual way with operators or other people. So right now we have also other kind of problematic. For example, today I was talking with one of my suppliers for a solution that wants to be implemented in a big company. Part of the system that is required is the communication system. I mean, the switches, the wires, and all the required information based to communicate the different components. Some of these components have lead time to be delivered until March of 2022. So even if you want to implement or you have the right solution or the right design, now we are facing other kind of problems in the supply chain, because the COVID, because the mobility, and now because the scarcity of microchips. So additionally to the common difficulties that we have to implement a solution, now we have these other external factors that are complicating the solutions. So for the designers or companies like Integra Automation, we are facing between which is the right solution in terms of price, but now the right solution in terms of time, the time frame that we have to implement the solution. But in the other side, we need to have some kind of a standard that that fits exactly the standardization that the company could have at their plant, because a lot of them want to minimize the spare parts or the knowledge required for the people to maintain the system. So they ask us to implement a specific technology in their solutions. So it's a mix of different challenges we are facing right now.
Yeah, again, it's a big topic, and I want to make sure I'm not taking us too far down a rabbit hole. But Matt, one of the themes I'm picking up from Eric and from the comments that the three of you made before is we've got a scarcity issue, right? We've got a scarcity of time, we've got a scarcity of labor, and we've got a scarcity of parts. So kind of taking that into account and the comments that Eric has just made to help us understand this idea of the challenges that are out there. Where can Industry 4.0 help? And I know this is too big of a topic for a short response, but I'll put you on the hot seat for a second. Where can this scarcity challenge be solved through the adoption and implementation of 4.0? In maybe a simplistic way that can almost be a tagline for the listeners and attendees to take away.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to describe it is efficiencies and productivity. You can take a good example of an operator that may have been in charge of one area a few years ago. There may be 5-10 stations for that product to go through. That's that same operator, when you adopt Industry 4.0 technologies, can manage the entire line by themselves. So that would be my short example answer.
No, that's terrific. And Mo, I see you nodding in violent agreement here. Where would you provide those recommendations to overcome this scarcity issue?
You want my tagline, Tom?
Absolutely.
My tagline is very simple, guys. You mentioned a few key words, you said, and I wrote it down: planning, designing, implementing, operating. The issue is silos. Yeah. Especially in bigger organizations, those are silos. And my tagline is smash the silos if you want to be successful. Smash the silos. You have to build an Industry 4.0 strategy team. You have to build a digital steering committee. You have to do it. Even for small organizations, you only got 5 plants, but you still have to do it. You have to assign ownership. You have to assign a communication structure. You have to assign a digital advisor, a digital transformation advisor, or an Industry 4.0 advisor in each plant location that you have. There has to be a corporate team that is not IT-led. Sorry, IT guys. It should not be IT-led. It should be multidisciplinary IT and OT, information technology, operational technology. The challenge today, in addition to what Eric and Matt said with uncertainties and education and all these, fully on board things, is at the end of the day, it comes to the execution piece. You got a piece that IT is going to do, you got a piece that maintenance has to do, you got a piece that quality has to do, and then the CIO has to sign off on it, then the CFO has to say, I got budgets, then the CEO signs anyways, if everybody else signs most of the time. But there's no structure, man. There is no roadmap. Everybody is siloed. So if you really want to be successful with Industry 4.0, it's back to basics. Build a structure which will own it, will do the assessments, will do the communication, will do the education, and will look into external factors, which is risk analysis, which is what Eric mentioned. But that is really the tagline that everybody has to think about and overcome. How do you smash the silos and collaborate? And then you will be very successful.
There's going to be a lot of people on planes leaving San Antonio with their little Post-it note that says "smash the silo." So this is good stuff. I've got one more kind of big topic that I'd like to see, Matt, if you wouldn't mind taking the lead on, because as a matter of fact, it's a comment you had made previously, And I think it actually is a great way to kind of tie all of this in. So, Matt, how can we reach this level of digitization that you have mentioned, within and between factories, as Mo had just alluded to, it needs to not just be in one location, and how can we do this to assure, not only design traceability, but also product quality and just as importantly, reliability, as we've been talking about scrap and other things. And it kind of with the goal, Matt, is how are we moving closer to this zero defects through digitization?
Well, as we've been talking through this over this past hour, we're talking about Industry 4.0 and these technologies and people and ways of working in general. But, one of the reasons why we were really excited to be invited here today, and thank you again for that invitation, is that we really see the automotive sector in general as a leading market sector to actually have this happen. And so I think, one of the key takeaways that I'd like to have with, people listening to this is that, IPC and other companies as well are really focused on providing these opportunities, but you need to get into the specifics. And so to begin to answer your question, Tom, as an engineer myself, one of the things, and I think Mo and Eric both alluded to this as well, is that this whole process of Industry 4.0 has really forced us to go back to process. And the people that are really good at this understand their process. You have to break down what you do, why you do it, who helps you, where your stuff goes, and all of these layers. So one of my first answers to your question is do a lot of process mapping. That process mapping can be physical process, that can be digital or data flow process. There can be a whole variety. It can be a supply chain, a partner process flow, but you have to know what is really happening in your business. Now, if you do that, you can start to get a handle on kind of your larger goal. Now, in terms of digitization, one of the things that we're focused on here at IPC is to create brand new suites of Industry 4.0 standards. So a few examples on the design front would be model-based design. So the way that components are coded and then symbols are created and then they are putting into bills of material and so on is quite old. I mean, these processes were developed in the 60s when the chips were first invented. And there's better ways to do this through, CAD-based, simulated, model-based design protocols. And so we have a standard for that. When you look at the manufacturing environment, we talked about equipment talking to each other, peeling data off the line for quality, for reliability, for logistics. Something like connected factory exchange we have, where it allows equipment to seamlessly talk no matter what the vendor is. So again, this helps you within your own walls of your company, but then you can imagine having multiple facilities or multiple partners. We shouldn't forget about sustainability. A lot of this Industry 4.0 conversation has been about how to make products faster and better, but our planet is hurting, and we need to make sure we're not contributing to that as best we can. So we need to be ensuring that we're building sustainable standards in all that we do as well. And lastly, as we get back into that kind of the final product mix, are things like traceability and just making sure that what we do is accounted for. And so again, a lot of these Industry 4.0 standards might not have Industry 4.0 on the title page, but again, these are things that need to be looked at so that we can be effective, we can reduce scrap, we can do all of these things that both Mo and Eric were talking about. So I think that, I guess to summarize my answer to the question is that number one, know your process. It's shocking how few people really know where stuff goes, or it gets to a certain point and then it becomes this black hole and nobody knows what's happening. The second point I would make is challenge what's been done before. A lot of times we call it copy forward. Copy forward is not terribly useful all the time, and you can always do better. And the last point I'll make is, again, this theme of digitization. it needs to be standardized across these different elements, whether it's design, manufacture, or back-end deployment.
That's terrific, Matt. Thank you. Yeah, clearly it seems we're past the point of, sliding off the back of the dinosaur on our way out of the bedrock quarry in the days of the Flintstones here as we're coming into 4.0. Mo, how are you seeing, and I think, Matt really did a great job of explaining this implementation of starting with something as core as process to accomplish something as technologically important as digitization.
Yeah, I really appreciate what Matt said, because digital transformation and Industry 4.0 is not just about your manufacturing floor. It's about the whole, what some call the digital thread. You have a part, you design the part, you manufacture the part, you aftermarket and service the part. So there is a role that Industry 4.0 plays in each layer of the digital thread that makes up a part, the whole life cycle. And there are great applications out there of tools that are being used, like model-based design that Matt mentioned. And in manufacturing, we talked a lot about connected assets. We didn't talk about connected worker, right? The operator. How can you empower the operator to do their job better, faster, more efficient, right? So by using tools like augmented reality and so on. Connected worker is really a growing trend. And then you have the aftermarket. So your product has been shipped out of the door and the customer is using it. So how can you take data across the whole digital thread and feed them back, data from the part out on the street used in an oil field, and sending data back to design so that you can improve future generations. So field data going back to design to improve future generation of version 2, version 3 of the same product. So closed loop feedback. So I think there are many, many use cases. They are not just in manufacturing, they're across the whole digital thread lifecycle. And it's important for you to pick your battles very wisely when it comes to Industry 4.0. But again, survey says that your biggest bang for the buck and your quickest win is usually starting on the factory floor. Your very expensive assets, very high cost of capital. So return on capital employed in manufacturing is usually the quickest win for Industry 4.0, and then scaling it to your connected products and connected design, your digital thread.
Absolutely. Eric, maybe if you could give us a closing comment on this digitization. You had mentioned in one of our previous topics this scarcity concept when it comes to labor, and kind of borrowing off what Mo had just mentioned. How do you see the opportunity for assimilation between digitization and labor, specifically when it comes to these capital intensive areas like the factory floor with the larger OEMs, or even down to our smaller startups who are having just as much of a challenge of managing their capital spending and trying to implement Industry 4.0 with this concept of digitization and how it can go and complement the labor situation that is, be honest, is somewhat of a challenge right now.
Yeah, it's kind of, I'd say, in one side, right now a lot of companies are saying they have not enough workers to perform their duties in labors inside the companies. For example, in Canada, I was reading that right now they have not enough labor people because they closed the frontiers for the foreign people. And at the same time, a lot of baby boomers are getting retired. So in that case, it would be a great idea to have a lot of automation and Industry 4.0 implementation in order to reduce this kind of situations. But at the other hand, the people that has the responsibility to design or implement these kind of solutions are not enough to cover all the demand that we are having in North America, for example. Right now, with a company here in Mexico, ask for a solution from companies from Europe or the USA even, sometimes they are giving them very long lead times because they don't have the people to address the solution. So I think it will take some time in order for universities to prepare in the right way to the engineers with the right skills, but at the same time, the current engineers at the companies need to be continuously educated because this technology is evolving very, very fast. So they need to keep learning in a continuous way in order to keep up to date with these new solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. I will apologize in a sense. I was hoping to take some of the audience comments coming in, but I think the dialogue has been, so engaging with these various topics, and I think a lot of great information has come in through here. So what I might do, just in respect of time, is I'd like to give each of our three panelists an opportunity for some quick closing comments. We've covered a pretty broad range of questions with regards to the adoption, the implementation, design, and otherwise of Industry 4.0. Mo, maybe I'll start with you. Other than we all love Smash the Silo, but what would be a closing remark or two that you would like the listeners and attendees to take away from this opportunity to be on this panel?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be on the panel. And my advice to the audience, in your journey toward Industry 4.0 and in your vision to achieve a zero downtime, zero defects manufacturing operation, think about people, process, and technology. Start with the business case and implement in a think big, start small approach. Don't be afraid to fail fast, but it's very important to act now, act today, build the steering committee, find quick wins, low-hanging fruits, and start your Industry 4.0. Even if you're at a 2.0 or a 3.0 level, it's worth starting today and achieving quick improvements to become even more competitive.
Yeah, excellent. And Mo, thank you so much for your insight that you've provided on this panel. It's been very enlightening, I'm sure, for not only myself, but also the audience as well.
Thank you.
Eric, what closing comments would you like to leave us with and that the audience can take away with them?
I would recommend to the audience that for implementation, it's very important that the CEO gets involved, but don't forget to involve to the operator at the floor plan, because the CEO and the engineers could design and set the strategy, but if they don't involve the operators that really knows the specific operation of the specific composition of the product, maybe the solution will not be the right one. So please involve from the CEO to the operator and act right now. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Yeah, no, Eric, thank you for participating. We certainly appreciate your comments. Matt, I'm going to leave it with you for last comments. What would you and IPC like the audience to take away from this opportunity to listen in here this past hour?
First, Tom and Mo and Eric and everyone listening, thanks for your time here. I mean, this is a complicated issue. A few comments. Number one is I don't know. We kind of hang on slogans and phrases. We have a new one here. Smash the silos. I love it, Mo. Thanks. One that's been coined now, and we're getting on to well over a decade, is the idea of an industry revolution. And I think for all of us that have been in this industry, I don't know if I subscribe to the term revolution. I think I'd like to think of it as more of an evolution. There is no silver bullet. There's a lot of hard work. There's a lot of thinking and strategy and money that it takes for this to happen. So one message would be to not give up. This is big, but it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of effort, not just within your own companies, but across the supply chain. Number two is manufacturing matters. I guess I'll add that as my tagline, because what's exciting, again, as from an engineering and science background is that manufacturing has largely been ignored or lost in certain areas in geographies, and manufacturing really does matter. And so we need to make sure that we wrap all of these concepts around that. And thirdly, and this is something as a bit of a wake-up call, is that we've been discussing this, I think, maybe more in a North American light. One thing we see is, make no mistake, this transition is happening, and it's happening quite quickly. Geographies, including Europe and Asia, are well ahead, and in some cases might even be 8 to 10 years ahead of where some North American manufacturer producers are today. So that's my final comment, is really think about the geography and how far ahead we may or may not be, because this is moving forward quite quickly.
Terrific. Well, thanks, Matt. We've run up against our hour that we were given for this conversation, and I'd like to thank each of you, Mo, Eric, Matt, for participating in this. This is we've covered a wide breadth of topics. I'd like to thank Mexico Now for bringing these three industry experts to come and provide this information to everyone. I trust the audience benefited just as much as we did from this conversation. Thank you three all again, and thank you, audience, for listening in. I hope everyone really took a lot away from this, and we appreciate the time, and I hope everyone has a great rest of this participation in the USMCA Auto Industry Summit.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. It was a really good panel on heading towards Industry 4.0. We learned a lot about the different areas of the challenges that we're working on in terms of Industry 4.0. It reminds me of work that we've been doing in the more recent past with the European manufacturers, and it's something that is, though they were making it sound like the Europeans are that much far ahead of us on this, and I'm not sure that's the case.